Hello, hello. Whoa. I thought I would confuse this microphone with karaoke, so I need to make sure it's not that. Welcome everyone to this last session of the day. My name is Virginie Chasserio, and I'll be your moderator. So this session is all about virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality. As Don Taylor said this morning, the thread of these learning technologies is about building future skills together. So augmented reality, virtual reality has been for a while around us, but is it still in the scope of the early adopters? What do we need to empower organizations or to motivate them, to embrace it and to adopt these technologies? So to talk about that, we have with us Tom Wambeke. And Tom is a Chief Learning Innovation, which specializes in providing sustainable learning solutions with the objective to generate impact and organizational change. And their clients are UN agencies, development banks, international organizations, government, and non-governmental organizations. So Tom is going to share with us how they've tried, to upscale these technologies over the past 10 years and what they learned about that. So over to you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Virginie. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Good. Happy to be here. So as you see, what Virginie introduced me as a part of the ITCLO, the International Training Center of the ILO, which is a specialized UN agency. UN agencies are also specialized in abbreviations, so I promise not to use any today. I'm an honored member of the AAAAA, which is the American Association Against the Abuse of Abbreviations, so don't worry. I'll make sure that I'll keep it quite clear. Specifically, we would go into technical language and so on. So maybe a little word more. I'm working as a Chief of Learning Innovation in a department of 20 staff that are looking how can we basically serve new learning technologies, methodologies, digital media and design towards, the clients, the partners that you have mentioned, Virginie. It's about 60,000 people on a yearly base. It used to be 20,000, accelerated a little bit also through pandemic into an online migration. Now we're reaching out to 60,000 people. That's maybe not that big, but you need to think that all these 60,000 people are multipliers. They work for governments, for organizations, so they basically then train other people in their other organization. Just to sketch you a little bit what the background of my organization is. And of course, when talking about learning technology today, I want to talk a little bit about immersive technologies. I was thinking out, how am I going to go about it? Because there's different angles. This is definitely not going to be a sales pitch for it. But maybe the story of how an organization took that up, what the challenges were, what we have learned, and all the different dimensions on that element I would like to discuss with you, and also in a very open and conversational style. So as soon as you have a question or a remark, please feel free to interrupt me. I'll start with the first image, because usually when you talk about VR, you hear it in the last 10, maybe even 20 years. Everybody has done a project, a pilot, an experiment, and it usually got stuck into that kind of mode as well, at least in, let's say, our organization in the beginning. And a little bit before the pandemic, something happened. It was not actually scaling up through the innovation unit, which we are, because that's always us trying to do new experiments, new things. It got scaled up because someone got completely passionate about immersive technology, and that was our director. You see him sitting there. So that's the senior management of the training center that got completely a wow effect from immersive technology, and then decided we need to move into that kind of direction. So it was not from a pilot or an experiment or the early adopters. It was really from a senior management decision that said that let's really dive into that direction. Collided also very coincidentally with the pandemic, where we basically were dying of Zoom fatigue. Instead of flight tickets, we were basically pouching out Oculus Quests to our audience, and have done that a little bit over 1,000, let's say, pouches we've done in the last 2 years. So that's the context of the experiment. Maybe a second element that I want to mention, if you probably have heard speeches on virtual reality or augmented reality, and it's usually also very much connected with, I had a discussion with Virginie before, on a specific topic. I mean, what would be the first VR thing that you would remember that you have seen? Can somebody give me an answer? What the first VR simulation or thing that you have seen, what would that be?
Safety on oil rigs.
Safety on?
Oil rigs.
On oil rigs. Safety on oil rigs. The other ones? Onboarding. It's already. Anything else? Yes?
Donor screening with nurses and blood donation.
Okay. Good. So just a few examples, but you will see that when we would open up the examples, a lot comes through. For example, in our training center, we would immediately focus on safety, or occupational safety and health, and all, let's say, the simulations that you have in there that were developed in the past 20, even 30 years. What we have done was the first thing is say, let's not connect, let's say, immersive technology with one particular topic. If you would look at our course catalog that we have, it's about 42 different expertise areas, and that could go from human rights to vocational training to enterprise development. It's very broad. So what we did in the first thing is deconnect it. We're not going to use VR for example, safety training. We're just going to deconnect it with the topic and see how can we integrate it as a kind of a cross-cutting technology in everything what we are doing. Here, this one is very specific. If you go to our website, ITCLO.org, there's a section on stories, and you will see the stories that you will find is not exclusively on safety or on simulations. Or this one was a recent conference that we have held on the realities of skills development in TVET through actually immersive technologies. But it's not connected only with that. There's really a wide scope of implementation. I think that also helped us to consider VR not topic specific anymore, but as one of the tools that we're actually using in our thing. So let me share also one or two other reflections before I start with the presentation. We always are talking about the changing world. I'm not going to do that, but what I think was important for the colleagues that worked on this experiment, on that scaling up, there were two things that we have seen. At the one hand, we had, as you know, Darwin mentioned that it's not the strongest that are going to survive, but the ones that are most adaptable to change. The colleagues around us, were very adapted towards that kind of unreadable quote from Hawking: "Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change." This has been one of our core recipes also on how we basically implemented VR in our setting. Never we had the focus on technology. That was one motivation of the team. If you would look at the organizational level, we are with a lot of players, even within the UN, that actually work on technology-enhanced learning. So we also said, well, if the exponential change of those technologies, what is currently happening, if we are not jumping on that boat, if the change is way faster outside our organization than inside our organization, then Jack Welch would say, then the end is very near out there. So that was also an additional motivation to stay up on the top of core visibility and innovation. I'm using a few quotes here because they also will add to my story in a later stage. Then the last quote that I'm going to use is from a futurologist. I'm very passionate about foresight. Maybe there's some other people that also like strategic foresight. And he said, well, if we always do what we have always done, we will get what we've always got. Actually, my first experience with immersive technologies dates from a while ago. Who of you remember, I think it was 10 or 12 years ago, when the massive Second Life was introduced? You remember that episode? Was an interesting episode, but also immediately reflecting what is happening here. We're creating a Second Life, which is an exact copy of First Life. Like the added value of moving into that immersive environment is, oh, I'm in a virtual aula, but nothing else is happening than in my physical aula. So it was a kind of a strange question that we keep on asking right now. I think that's exactly the question, that can we do some different things out there, which is not just a copy of, let's say, what we already used to.
And I think the entire field of technology-enhanced learning has known that phase. I mean, it's not only applicable to immersive technology, it's also applicable to traditional e-learning, to the whole notion of LMS. I think that question for us was extremely important. And then last but not least, I'm not going to show the video, what he's saying here, but we got a kind of an innovation. There was a bit of innovation whitewashing going on within the system, I thought, but what Gutierrez mentioned when he launched the innovation toolkit, he said, we need to do things differently and we need to do different things. So what I'll try to do also today in the presentation, showcasing how that, tagline of doing different things and doing things differently are actually a good success factor on also the implementation of immersive technologies. So what am I going to talk about today? If you look at the history of learning tech, I mean, from classic e-learning to gamification to social mobile, I'm focusing on the immersive tech that actually now got scaled up in one way or another. It got more accessible, also in terms of costs, in terms of technology, also in terms of methodology. So my focus will be on that area. Of course, I was talking with somebody else. Becomes really interesting when we start to combine immersive tech with gamification and with other stuff as well. But for the focus, I will basically focus on immersive tech. That's another problem. I don't know how many immersive technology experts are here in the house, but I'm still talking very generic about it. If you would want to see the whole landscape of what virtual reality, mixed reality, and also augmented reality is, there's quite a lot. You probably have seen it in the exhibition space as well. There are many different technologies. There are different accents. Augmented reality is not virtual reality. What I will do is, in my speech, will be independent of any of these, let's say, specific ones. I might use examples where I dive fully into virtual reality, but the reflections would basically also be applicable if I show you an example on the use of augmented reality in vocational training, for example. Just to make sure that we're all on the same line, when I speak about augmented reality, it's the digital layer on top of the reality that you know through these devices, mobile, tablet. If I speak about mixed reality, it's the digital layer on top of the reality, and there's an interaction between them both. And last but not least, my main focus here will be on virtual reality, where we're completely immersed in a virtual environment. One thing that I'm not going to do in this presentation is talk about the technologies itself. Yes, how we use them, definitely. The problem of technologies, what we have faced was, I mean, in the 2 years that we now have been accelerating and increasing with the exponential growth of the technologies, was one of our big issues also. The moment that we bought a device was actually already the moment that it was outdated. I mean, to radicalize it a little bit. And that was extremely difficult in an institutional organizational context for a scaling up operation. Okay, we're now, and the version that we have bought is not valid anymore because there were several upgrades, and the new vendors that actually have been showcased to us are not compatible with the other ones. So it's going to be a more general discussion about, when I refer to Oculus Quest, it's not because of a preference. There are many other devices that we're using, HTC Vive and others, but just to mention that also the landscape of technologies is extremely wide. What for me is a bit more important, where do we put these immersive technologies in a training center, in an adult learning training center? It's, of course, we have also a spectrum there, where basically in the past, as I said, we very much have these three categories: skills-based, knowledge-based, and behavior altering. What I found interesting, and also after walking through the exhibition, more and more, I mean, applications or immersive technologies are also focusing on areas that before were not the case. Skills training, soft skills training is actually a very interesting one. I've seen programs on inclusive leadership based upon 2 or 3 different applications out there. So also I will make sure that the examples or the case studies that I use that we have done situate you also a little bit in where are they coming from, because in each area there might be actually different applications, different interpretations out there. The human mind has a maximum attention span of 10 minutes, and then people start to disconnect. So I will ask a question to you right now. I'm going to put you on 2 axes here and ask, actually it's good on a Thursday afternoon because there are 2 actions here. I'm going to ask you the question, are you optimistic about the future or are you pessimistic about the future? That's my first question, but you have to combine it with the second question. And here maybe I could place immersive technologies instead of technology. How would you answer this question? Technology is bringing us closer together. Would you agree with that? Or technology is pushing us further away? Usually what I do is I ask, position yourselves in the room and then think, but that's going to be a bit too complicated. What I'm going to do is simplify it, and I'm going to give you 1 minute that you discuss this question with your neighbor and say, where would you position yourselves? Are you more an optimist, but technology pushing us apart, or are you more a pessimist, but still believe in technology that brings us together? So 1 minute with your neighbor, and then I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. Okay. Can I have your attention again? I hear quite a rising debate here. Just also apologize if I speak too fast. That's probably the result of living 15 years in Italy. I'm not Italian, I'm Belgian, but I'll try to slow down my speech. Did you hear something unexpected from your neighbor, or something that stuck to you? I see people nodding, I see people saying yes, some people saying no. Maybe one or quick feedback from the room that I would like to, that surprised your mind. Anyone? Yes, can you give the microphone? There.
So we kind of discussed that initially we were both kind of thinking, you know, it's a positive thing, but we found that as you talk about the 4 parts, I myself was in the dead middle, because I think I'm both optimistic about the potential that we have, but pessimistic about the negative impacts of some things. And also, the tech is bringing us closer because we can communicate faster and wider than ever before, but the mental and social impacts on those pieces of communication, because you're not actually connecting, you're just communicating. So it's a bit of everything.
Thanks a lot. Anyone else in the room? Don't be shy. There's a person there, Virginie, there. There, with the person on the second row.
Thank you. I sort of agree with that, but I think what it's done is it's put us in bubbles. It's made us, it's digitized us. It's made it so that we can all communicate very effectively, but we're still separate.
Okay. What was the last? Can you repeat your last phrase?
Well, we're separated.
Okay,
we're
separated.
in different bubbles.
Okay,
but the bubbles communicate very well.
So a very ambivalent position of separated, distracted bubbles that communicate very well with each other. Any last input or feedback that we can hear? There's a person. Yes?
Yeah, I think we are optimistic about the future, no doubt about it. But you know, as far as technology bringing us closer together or pushing us apart, it depends on the context, and it depends who you talk to. So we're not too sure about that.
Okay. Thanks.
It's very contextual.
Yeah. Contextual, ambiguity, complexity already is extracting out of 3 questions. I think it would continue. I keep on asking. The reason why I asked you that question was not just for entertainment purposes, but just, as I said, I love strategic foresight, putting 2 axes. That's the start of a kind of scenario planning where you would envision different future scenarios, and we've been doing that quite a lot. What is the future of, let's say, technology-enhanced learning? And we usually make it even more complex. You start with 2 dimensions, but you could actually apply 4, 5, 6 dimensions. But already from a simplistic question, you get complicated answers. So that's why I'm always very surprised when the whole debate about immersive technology will be the next educational technological revolution. Would be a very simplified way to look at it. It would be a very simplified way to look at the context, at the complexity. So what I want to do in the next chapter of my conversation is to show you how that complexity also got integrated in what we are doing in our work. So there was never a simple answer. Sometimes the questions when we talk about immersive technologies are very simple. You know, what is the cost, or what is the thing? They need to be put into a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is very ambivalent, is very contextual, and has actually not only 2 axes, but probably 16 different axes that you need to deal with whenever you want to do a successful experiment, and definitely when you want to scale it up, because then the complexity degree becomes even bigger. So what are some of these essential ingredients out there? When we introduced immersive technologies in our training center, we never positioned it as, how would I say it, the new thing that will replace other stuff. I mean, we have been talking 15 years about blended learning. Now the whole hype is about hybrid learning journeys. And we also did something similar. We said we have a kind of an offer in our training campus, which is a combination of blocks that we reconstruct on our learning journey, which comprises out of classical e-learning, then also more interactive virtual classrooms. We still have also an important face-to-face component, and we just added a fourth component on the train, which we call immersive learning. So it was never seen as the standalone project. It was never seen as the big innovation technology kind of thing, but it was infiltrated in the different projects that we have been doing. It also got the same visibility as the other ones. And at specific moments in a kind of a learning journey, you also had the chance to have access to it. I think that was one of the essential ingredients that I still believe in. I want to also hear your opinions about it. A second essential ingredient was the following, and actually I like to use that tagline because we discussed a lot about technological headsets, but in the end it was really about changing mindsets. And that whole tagline of changing mindsets and also underlying changing learning models have been really the core of our focus. Not what kind of technology or what kind of application we are going to use. That was of secondary nature, but how can we use this kind of technology integration as a way of, you know, doing things differently and doing different things, so what I referred before. The third successful element, that was a little bit more to get also buy-in from senior management. It was not enough to have a director who was extremely passionate about it, because senior management is comprised out of more people, and also we have a board. And for them it was basically the two elements of scalability and also effectiveness. And then also when you would contrast that with the other modalities that we have already, from the traditional classes on the job training coaches and videos and so on. So that is also an essential ingredient in our mix that we have used. Then the next one, you probably have seen all kinds of different pedagogical models out here. I'm not going to name them, but just referring to one of them also belongs to an essential ingredient for us. It was, when we talk about using immersive technology, it's not like Second Life just as a kind of a substitution. You know, we go into a virtual immersive room instead of a physical room. It was more, how can we use it as a kind of a transformational kind of thing? Where can we use immersive tech to do things what we could not do in reality? And that's always remained our focus. Even with the many applications were geared immediately towards substitution, we started, okay, we use it, we start with substitution, but is there something that we can do that we impossibly can do with all the other modalities out there? And also put our focus on that one. And then applying all the different, let's say, virtual learning pedagogies, one of my big surprises when we look about the underlying design models, if I look on the hours of design that we take to get into an immersive technology project, it's almost 4 times as more than what we would do with a classical traditional e-learning model. So that was also a reflection that I wanted to share with you. So just skipping one slide, because I don't know why this slide got in here, but that's why I'm going to skip it right now. And maybe start with, as I said, I don't want to speak about educational models or pedagogical models. What also helped us, instead of actually asking big theories, because the first thing what happens is that people don't listen anymore, we started with, can we ask some key questions to our audience? Not only the big question, like can we unlock human potential through lifelong experiential learning, but asking questions that in the different topical areas of people that would start to think out loud. I'm going to give you 2 examples. One is here. If you'd live in all skin colors, what would happen to your recruitment bias? You know, a very simple question. Connecting it with some of, I think if you would look out there, all the kind of applications, specifically immersive applications that are there in terms of job recruitment, very interesting because it helps you to look at it in a fully different way. Asking another question, doing a presentation right here. If you had a standing ovation at the Royal Albert Hall, how confident would you feel for tomorrow's meeting? Actually, what I should have done is use several of these immersive public speaking applications that are out there, from Ovation to, I forgot all the names, but there are different ones out there. And with our colleagues, it helped to ask them a very simple question and actually connect that question then with the approach that we wanted to go forward. And we asked these questions because I want to avoid that we get into the trap of doing always the same what we have done before with the same results. We wanted to avoid, let's say, the big criticisms that was against Second Life. They said like Second Life did not give any value. You know, I don't know if you have seen this site, but this was a funny site, getafirstlife.com, saying like, look, we need to go back towards, you know, the real world. While I think if you ask a few of these interesting questions combined with some of these underlying new models and changing mindsets, you probably can get a really new thing in virtual reality. So what I'm going to do in the upcoming, any questions? Because I don't want to be a kind of a fast public speaking train right here. Are there any remarks so far? Feel free to interrupt me. Nothing yet. Technically always, I mean, from my VR speaking app, I learned that you need to wait 8 seconds and then somebody will pop up with a question because it's unbearable to remain silent. But I won't put you in that position. I mean, what I wanted to do now is, I mean, if I talk about models, I talk also about learning affordances out there. You will see them here, not presenting them, but what I'm going to do is maybe showcase 5 or 6 projects that we have done in immersive technology and how we connected them with one of these, let's say, pedagogical added values out there. Some classical questions, some more advanced questions, and then actually showcase what we have done. And I would call them not only the learning affordances, but I also would call them the power factors of immersive technology. The first one that I have chosen, of course, always the same one, the Power 1.1, return on investment, very much used by flight simulators and other kind of stuff. Well, here we got a question during pandemic. The World Food Program that basically is running operations globally has like a huge, what they would call an emergency simulation type of training. And of course, because of COVID, they had to abolish it, but it was extremely important to do it because people need to be deployed in disaster areas and need to be trained at a very high realistic type of level. So what did we basically do? We bought a kind of access to an immersive environment, and with the logistic clusters of World Food Program, we recreated an entire humanitarian camp. Extremely simple. I mean, there were 4 tents. We pouched about 50 of these headsets globally in different worlds, and then the entire simulation started not only through deep immersive technologies, but it was a combination between traditional e-learning, Zoom webinars, and again, that extra component out there. And when we did the pilot and reported back to senior management, that question was very easy to do. Actually, the return of investment, because usually when they do the live simulation, it happens only once a year. It's extremely costly because it also involves helicopters, airports, and everything. Now, with this thing, you can do it for the same kind of budget 5 times. Was actually a brain changer to basically move into, okay, let's further invest on it. Was it a complete success? I would say there's a lot of tiny tricks that I also want to explain later that we faced as terms of challenges. But for the challenges, I'll do that later. I want to have first the positive look. Second power thing is the Power 2, I would call it, it's very memorable. I mean, the definition here, high presence VR is the most high bandwidth communication ever devised. We, on a yearly basis, we organize an innovation day where there's an entire VR corner. And now in 3 programs, one of them was the ILO leadership program, where we also, 6 months later, were asking what was really memorable experience in that leadership program, because we do all kinds of different things out there. And we had a high recognition factor again of the use of these immersive technologies. And we were asking, is this because of the wow effect? Is this because of the roller coaster? And for the first time it was not, because we used, for example, in soft skills, this kind of inclusive leadership. We partnered up with the London-based Body Swaps on that one, and that was something that they have never done before. So that memorable element, I would call it the power factor 2. The other one is a very, let's say, easy one, learning by doing. Giving you the example of sending 200 of these devices to Qatar, basically for labor inspectors that needed to be trained in an application, what we called immersive factories, typical for occupational safety and health, where they went through these kind of scenarios. A very typical classical example of VR, but it took us ages to convince the subject matter experts that this is an easier way. Of course, we also do the inspection visits on locus, but here at least they have access to the training 24 hours and they can do it as many times as they want. So for us, and they do it. I mean, it's also really with skills, with haptic stuff and all what is going on there. The fourth power factor, I would call it, I mean, I talked with a colleague before, she said, yeah, does it have impact on learning? I think the first studies are coming out, also academical studies. A lot of studies from consultancies also have seen out there, but there is some data. What is interesting that most of the applications are connected with, let's say, quite granular learning analytics. And here, the impact, if you would compare it, I will refer to one or two studies, if they compare it with text or video, or that the first results are out there. We've used an application, I already mentioned it. It was body swaps where we basically, you have the device, you're going into a conversation with a patient, with anything, and then suddenly they record, let's say, how you react in that situation. After that, they switch perspective and you're confronted with yourself speaking to you from a specific perspective. Something that you cannot do in real life, something that you can do only in virtual reality. What was interesting there is looking at the data and the analytics on improvement in some communication, soft skills that are out there. Before, we could not use it. We would only have the feedback of an expert out there. Now, referring to, do we have empirical evidence of effectiveness? I think any consultancy or big consultancy has released plenty of studies on it. I'm just referring to two of them that I was reading yesterday, Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Interesting, I see still, I mean, this is not academic research at all. It focused a little bit on some of the elements that I was saying, but what I like about the different studies is that they also treat the entire question from a multidimensional point of view, not just of, you know, let's do immersive technologies, but, you know, these are all the factors that you need to take into account when you want to move on. And that makes it complicated because there are a lot of challenges out there as well. Maybe mentioning some of the, before I go into the, yeah, I'll do the challenges now and then I'll open up for a question round. For us, one of the biggest challenges in institution, we work globally, so it's not that we are a campus. We are working in 182 different countries. For us, one of the biggest issues was deployment. For any reason, I remember the first pouch that we sent to Geneva, which is next to Turin, where I live, was already stopped at the border because of dangerous magnetic material. So we had to send it through diplomatic pouches all over the place. So that was a kind of issue. The deployment also, and then the technical support and the maintenance in these different things, that was something that we underestimated. I mean, scaling up, I'm only talking about 1,000 devices right now, but when I see like big players, like Walmart training 1 million people, I said, there we are not at all yet. But for us, it was an unexpected hurdle. The second one, we have a lot of data on what we are doing, but it still lacks integration with, let's say, our standard classical platform of learning analytics. We also have to build in ad hoc plugins to also integrate it out there. And so the whole data management with all the different applications, because there's not one application at this stage, we're using at least 7 or 8 different applications, sometimes with different technologies, and not all of them are integrated with our central monitoring. So that was a big challenge that we're still trying to solve. Completely in the beginning, we had also big ethical issues. I remember the first time that we sent our Oculus One, that we were forced to have a Facebook account with it, completely then return the whole conversation. So these were the type of questions that we also had to deal with and say, like, how are we going to go about it? And maybe the last one, specifically in the beginning, I'm going to give you the example of the World Food Program. An application, if you use it as it is, standalone, it's fine. I mean, the costs are relatively factored, but people want context. They want to develop their environment. I remember the airports and the things that we had to build. There is a cost, how would I call it, in specific content creation. Okay, there's a lot of reusability stuff in terms of 3-dimensional objects, but if you really have to build from scratch, that's something that we also underestimated in the beginning. It's becoming more accessible. There's also a quite live open source community. There's also different programs that make it now a bit more accessible, but this still is on our working list. Do we need to customize, personalize every time we do a new project, or can we just less focus on the customization and more on the learning process? Because I remember the first 6 months, people were always asking, oh, I want my avatar more looking like me, it has strange eyes, which I didn't find as a relevant question, but people were really passionate about it. You know, it doesn't look like in reality, I want to have it exactly like the reality, while for us, and I'll give you a recipe later to bypass that, we're not going to spend another 5K on making it even more looking like. We have to focus really on the underlying learning process, and convincing people in that one was not an easy one. I don't know why I bring him up again, but in the Web Summit 2 years ago, for him, the most important competence was basically learn how to learn. And for us, throughout the entire journey that we have now been involved, was basically had to question every time, every assumption that we had of how do we see a meaningful learning design process. We're all experts in it, but as I said, everything what we have done, and I'll show you that at the end of my presentation, was completely reconfiguration of how we usually see basically learning. And that's also one of my main lessons learned. Now, I'm again on the 15-minute branch. I need to disconnect. Before I go into a typical case study, I want to hear some impressions from you. I mean, there's different elements that I've said. Are there things resonating? Are there things that you said, like, look, I would like to question that further? Yes, here and then there.
So we've developed 6-packs within our company that we've been using as, like you said, a kind of test and experiment, and we're coming to the point where we're looking to see the impact now. But we've also identified that working with other providers, although it's got the benefit of their expertise, it is also costly. So the idea of there are programs and other things out there that might be more accessible and easier for a non-coder to work with. Getting ideas of like what programs you've used, how you could, you know, connect to those communities would be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, there's a list that I can then give you a few examples here. I remember when we first, as a kind of a comparative, we wanted to have an immersive environment, you know, and if you would look now at the market, there are at least 15 different companies out there. Actually, we took one which was quite unknown, Arthur. It's based in Vienna, but independent. I mean, could have been also at Engage, or it could have been anyone. I'm forgetting the names right now. Every time we had a partner project, I said, like, look, when we had the discussion about costs, because there's an investment needed to be done, we basically gave them a little bit of a warming up with, for example, here, if I'm thinking about the free application Mozilla Hubs, you know, as one of them. Just get a feel out of it that you know what you're talking about, because one of the biggest problems of immersive technologies is, I mean, we've heard about it, we've seen it, but you only start to understand it when you really are into it. And that, to pitch that, for example, to my director was quite easy, because he was basically completely into it. He had even the idea to do all his management meetings in VR, which I don't think it was a good idea. The only good thing was that these minutes were then reduced to 45 minutes, because people after 45 minutes in VR, you know, they start to get tired out of it. But again, that was a changing mindset question, because through that experience, people started really to ask these questions: do these management meetings really need to take longer than 1 hour? I mean, here the technology forces us into a kind of a jacket that we really needed to redesign these management meetings, and that's what I want to say. The added value of VR sometimes came in unexpected type of ways. But I'm now completely deviating from your question. Going back to the technologies, as I said, like what I can send to you is, like, for example, immersive learning environment. We did a comparative analysis, 10 or 15 applications out there. For us, they were all very similar. I mean, one had some extra kind of thing, but it was just, there's a lot of options there in the market, and also the prices are becoming much more accessible than what they are. It's more when we went to very specific contextual providers like Immersive Factory, what I've shown for occupational safety and health, or Aeon Reality for training of medical. I mean, the field is very wide, I must say. One of the big issues that we have, we work again with 7 different applications. How do you meaningful integrate that, knowing that not all the applications use the same technology, not all of them are all adaptable. Also, the underlying business models are completely different. So there was a lot of calculations that we had to do that we did not see or did not expect. And I had the impression that specifically, if you look at the many startups in there, that they also were in the same soul searching on how specifically can we adapt with, let's say, a large organization that is not using VR on a daily basis. That would be their dream, but for us it was mainly as a kind of a one component in there. There was another question there, yes?
Yeah, hi, I'm interested. Have you done anything with haptics so that people get some kind of tactile feedback on the experiences they're having in VR?
Yeah. Not as a project, but for example, the environment that we were using, Arthur, and there was a little bit of haptics, but not in the thing that, I mean, with the, how do you call the handheld kind of elements. There were things that you really could feel when you were doing things or moving kind of elements, but nothing specifically in terms of, we have seen a few experiments, specifically in occupational safety and health, where they really had to do and manipulate operations, but then it went also more into mixed reality with Microsoft HoloLens or with other stuff that they have actually done. So on that one, not yet, but the interesting is that we get questions. So one of the elements also, when we started to basically experiment in different ways, we also got more questions that were diving us now into new kind of problems that we have not exposed yet. So that would be my answer to that. Any other question? Yes, here in the front.
Have you seen any scenarios or examples of applications of VR in conjunction with AI? Like, for example, you join a virtual reality environment, thank you. You join a virtual reality environment and then you have a coach that's artificial intelligence based, or that kind of things?
Yeah. Well, the one that we have used here in the example that I was giving on body swaps, the data that it's collecting then also feeds in what kind of automatic answers that you actually are getting. My impression, maybe not on all the things, but that sometimes that the AI models were not yet fully fine-tuned to, or maybe the user base was too small, or sometimes it was very predictable feedback that you would get. But I think that's where I also see a future, and we will start to combine AI, immersive technologies, gamification, and come up with interesting cocktails out there, then the party really can start. I think we're just at the start of the party out there. But maybe I wanted to show you one case that maybe exemplifies our entire approach towards it. And as I said, I'm a big fan of strategic foresight, so the art of envisioning different futures. And in our campus, we are organizing a lot of foresight labs, which are basically fully interactive experiences where, together with a group of professionals, very interdisciplinary, try to look what is going to be the future of vocational training, or what is going to be the future of any topic that you basically want. For us, it was extremely important to do that in a very physical, architectural space, because every methodology changes the way you interact with the other people, changes also the results, and at the end of that foresight lab, you almost make the future tangible. You can almost feel it. When COVID happened, we said, oh, what are we going to do with our foresight labs, because we cannot travel anymore. And there was immediately the kind of feeling that we can never do that through a series of webinars or any other combined traditional e-learning with things. So why don't we do it in VR? That was the first kind of question. And what we've done there is, instead of just meeting each other in an immersive workshop and doing the same things that we always do, we said, no, we're going to go back to the design table. What we have done is, in foresight, we had like 15 different foresight methodologies, and we said, like, what if we now translate these methodologies in architectural VR setups? Maybe it's quite abstract what I'm saying, but I'm going to illustrate it, because it would be super interesting that the methodology becomes almost the architectural technology. In human words, what does that mean? For example, in foresight, there's a method which is called wind tunneling. Basically, you're going to test some of the assumptions that you have done in the group and said, like, well, wind tunneling, is there a possibility that we can create an architectural tunnel so that with participants, when you do the different, let's say, validation on the resources, systems, and the actors, that together with your group, you walk together in that tunnel, almost as a physical experience in virtual reality. So that's something that we have never managed to do in reality itself. Okay, we do a bit of simulations, but wind tunneling is a concept. It's basically a group conversation methodology out there. And that was actually the start of trying to translate with digital architects a completely new VR experience. Here you see the first iterations of they're very dark, it looks like a tunnel out there, but also there, for example, in Foresight, what you do in one of the first stages is you look at the drivers of change, 180 signals we have in political, economical, cultural type of levels. So instead of doing that as a conversation, we ask people to go to a big type of library and actually open all the different cupboards where they can see the different signals out there. Again, an example where you translate a methodology into an architectural technology. So we have been working on all these different elements, and this is now an experiment that what we're calling future fields. And after a 5-day immersion, not 5 days in VR, of course, actually 5 hours in VR during those 5 days, they basically come up with, in the end, they create their own future city, and together with a group of colleagues, here you see ILO senior management doing a kind of a walk in the future city that they have created themselves in the 4 days before, as a kind of literally a walk through the kind of city. Why I'm telling you that kind of story is that I said we dived fully into design. And that was the first time that we have created something different than what you usually see. And this brings me to a few lessons that I want to share with you. If you would reconstruct that entire journey, it would be quite complicated. Usually what we want to see is, it's very dark, no? But okay, sorry for that. But anyway, what you always want to have is the roller coaster effect. You know, I remember the first days when we pouched the Oculus, people were like extremely happy. They've never seen it. Usually would get a manual, now they get a thing. But then it's very fast. The wow is very fast gone after a while. So for us, it was very important to make sure that behind the roller coaster and the technological how, there's like a very structured process where we really start to, define the business case, the challenge, the key goals, where we create the ecosystem around it. What are the touch points with our current, let's say, curriculum that we have, and where can VR really create an added value? So it's almost a process that now repeats itself in every project that we are doing. Another lesson learned was the following one, that makers or the tech scene behind, they are not teachers. So thinking about, okay, let's do a project, you put the subject matter expert together with the pedagogical designer, is a format that did not work. It's much more complicated. So we also had to put some UX design in it, some user acceptance testing, the learning. It became a bigger team in order to build what we want to build. And only relying on the tech is definitely not enough. What we've appreciated is that the 3 styles, both visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, are embedded in one medium, something that we have not seen with all the other technologies that we were using. So for us, that was also something that let's continue to invest here. I have a question for you again. You don't have to discuss it, but I want to know in this audience, and I think it's a while ago, but who had from you the Tamagotchi? Is there something? Okay. Can I ask you an existential question? Did you cry when Tamagotchi died? No? Well, I think what Tamagotchi was teaching me in one way or another, and that's also in the whole immersive tech environment, that what is extremely important is, I would say, believability is much more important than realism. I had actually a lot of the discussions that we had with our people tended to do, we want to have it more look like me, or the environment needs to be a copy of something else, while we moved much more in this kind of dimension. So believability, apart from design, usability design, also we moved into something what we would call, and that would be the end of the reflection I want to make, in storytelling, in actually designing stories. What you have seen, Foresight's trajectory was basically a long storyline, almost the script of a film that we have there. Apart from storytelling, also what I would say, ontological design. This is the first time that I said I don't want to work with pedagogical experts, but I really went to look to work with architects, because for me, architects, they are the designers of space. Actually, more than architects, I would also say urbanists. And there's a very interesting TED talk on there. If you would type the sentence, what if digital spaces are physical? That's the question that the guy uses to do. And that question for us, I mean, the fact that I'm in a library makes me automatically silent. So the architectural space has a big influence, and I think also for VR, that's a kind of a dimension that we really need to explore. The future fields for us was an extremely important element on there. And of course, as I said, not only about educational design, but also the whole storytelling dimension. I think storytelling has been out there since we were born as human beings. It's probably one of the ancient arts, but when storytelling then gets connected with the different, let's say, technological elements, whether it's architecture, music, theater, visual arts, games, and education, I think here story can come actually completely be integrated into VR, AR, and MR. That's why we are also working a lot with people that have that kind of talent, and I think that's where we need to look further for. How are we doing in terms of time, Virginie?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. That means that we have to open for questions, and I have only one story to tell, but I'll do that at the closing hour. And that story will basically summarize on why we started with immersive technology and how we also see the future of it. But before I do that, maybe we can give 3, 4, 5 questions. There's a question in the back and also there. Or we can start there, yeah.
I think as learning and development, we need to be very careful to don't start with the solution, but with the problem. Although I do want to experiment with new approaches like VR and AR, and I don't have massive budgets. So do you have any very practical duct tape kind of solutions that you could download an app to create a sort of business case with?
Yeah. For us, when we answer the same question, we moved actually temporarily away from virtual reality towards augmented reality because everybody had access to the devices. I mean, we do a lot of projects in vocational training worldwide. There's an enormous repository in terms of objects that are out there, and basically with just the access and a quick app to create some of the thing, that would be a quick win. And it's basically taking step by step people into that kind of direction before you have to mobilize bigger budgets. Just to give you, the first budget that we used a few years ago was not bigger than 20K, just to give you an example, which is not a massive amount, but it was part of that kind of trajectory that we were doing, and also splitting up the budget in different type of elements. And also, I mean, you will always have the traditional questions on costs and budgets on there, but try to also, I mean, we never ask what is the cost of an airplane ticket, and we always ask what's the cost of a device. You know, when lockdown happened, we sent these headsets to everyone. Some of them were asking the cost of that, but they would never ask the cost of a flight ticket in there. So it's a little bit also of storytelling in that, and communication that we had to use to make it also acceptable. The fact that there are now 1,000 headsets circulating all over the world makes that question now a little bit easier to do, and that we can deal with the real kind of stuff. For me, that was the big frustrating element, to get that buy-in in the beginning, because you always had to focus on admin, on budget, and on thing, and not really on the project itself. As I said, we pivoted from augmented reality bit by bit towards virtual reality. In virtual reality, as I said, for example, Mozilla Hubs has an immersive learning environment. I hope that opens to do a bit more substantial experiments in there. But to give you, after 5 years, we are still in experimental mode, not in the sense of doing a small pilot here, but that experimental agile mindset is needed, because there always the unpredictable is happening. The moment when we had pouched those 1,000 Oculus, said, yeah, we survived COVID, oh no, we also need to have a disinfection sanitizer for these headsets because they are shared. So every time there was a new question popping up, that put us into a position where we also had to basically question, are our organizational, institutional models ready for something that radical? And bit by bit, you know, maneuvering on the different elements, we're moving. I would call it, it was always muddling through. There was never a linear process that said that's the plan and that's the execution. It was always more of a kind of a mindset, let's go for it and then see how we can get along. Senior managers, one of them, admin, IT also along, and then all the other people that actually are not to that category of the early adopters. The ILO leadership course, these were actually senior people that were thinking, are they going to be used to that? That was actually the audience that was suffering in Zoom with the whole unmute and mute kind of thing. That audience did not have any issues with our headsets because it's just putting it on. And actually they liked it because they were not disturbed during their Zoom calls with emails and other calls. They were completely immersed in it and had to focus for 45 minutes. The first time that they ever did that during COVID because it was impossible to focus on anything. So there are different sides of the story that you need to explore. Any other questions? Yes?
The ROI story that you told around the emergency food program that you put online is very, very powerful. But by not flying people around the world and getting them together, did you also take account of the lost ancillary learning that happens when a group of people come together physically and are sharing and building relationships in that space?
Yeah. No, for us that's a crucial question because there's always the anxiety, oh, we're moving into immersive technologies, essential travel will be now redefined, we already see it in organizations, you know, is it still going to be possible to fly in for just staff training? Interesting question. We actually said we stick to the hybrid model because as we have added value on VR, we have also added value on a community feel when we see each other 2 days or 3 days. So we're trying to basically mix that and reinforce one the other. It's not, again, this kind of replacement thing. And it's very sensitive. On the communication sides, people see it also kind of a disruptor that won't allow us to, you know, meet each other into the future. It's actually more one of the funny side effects when we started to do specifically the immersive learning spaces. We were looking on how they were used. They were used, of course, when we were doing our courses and the thing, but they were extremely used also beyond the hours. People found it funny to actually meet each other socially. We created a kind of a bar in our immersive learning space with fake champagne, and people found it very funny to go there and actually do all kinds of crazy stuff with the champagne bottles, opening it up large. So there was, again, an unexpected. We never thought that VR would be a kind of an interesting environment also to socially connect in a space where you really, you know, feel each other's presence in one way or another. And I think there, what we still underestimate, the past 10 years have always been, is this a gadget or thing? I think the experience is becoming really more interesting, and I'm very curious to see what technological evolution will be in the next 3 to 5 years, you know, that the headset becomes the smartphone that we got to know maybe also 10 years ago. It's not that long ago that, you know, smartphones were democratically accessible. Headsets are already a bit more accessible, but maybe they become also part of the normal extensions of our equipment out there. Any other question? Yes?
Some years ago, I think 6 years ago, I went to an ATD conference in the United States where they talked about a lot about immersive technologies. And 6 years after, I mean, now, I see the things in terms of application in the same stage. When I look to the companies, I don't see the real applications. I see intentions of putting in practice, but not a lot of trainings using immersive technology. I lost something. I mean, I'm wrong, it's my impression. Mm-hmm. Or the things are growing slowly. And what do you think that will happen in the next years? Would be more accelerated in the next years?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the example of the Arthur environment. It was a typical startup. When you go into that environment, of course, if you have never done it, that's an extremely wow effect. But it would not be something that you said, like, this is now mind-blowing, unless you probably have seen it in a museum or in a cinema also 5 or 10 years ago. Now the only difference is you can see it in your own home, you know, and do something. And I must say that if you would look at the thing where the gaming industry is much more spectacular, and I mean, you know, you just check your sons and daughters playing Fortnite and all the other stuff that they are doing, that's really mind-blowing in terms of design. What I see in the learning sector is indeed a much slower uptake. Now with Arthur, in the 2 years that we were working, almost these changes within the technology were almost always very incremental changes. In the beginning, I was a bit disappointed that there was not eye contact in thing, because it was technically impossible from the headset that we had at that time. So we had like strange glasses. We looked like mafia gangsters when we were walking into it. But then bit by bit, company was listening to the feedback that we were doing. There were small changes. The glasses went off, the eyes became less static, and you had the feeling that there was more or less a human being. Was there a human being? There's still a little bit avatar-esque kind of thing, and I see that kind of incremental thing moving on bit by bit. Specifically, we want to make it accessible for the larger crowds, because the experience is not yet a full type of immersion, but it's already much more. So, I don't know, radical shifts, is there something more than what we have seen with Second Life or I think so, where it will, let's say, change the game when, specifically at the technological side, when it's going to be completely immersed. I'm very curious what the different companies are currently doing, from Apple to Meta to the thing, with the next kind of generation of devices that are going to on there. But the story won't finish there. As I said, believability for me is more important than the reality kind of factor, and that requires a changing mindset. Like, that requires the motivation to go and set up the headset to do something. That requires the effort in what we're going to do to create that kind of experience and combine it with the other things. So it's also an ambivalent answer that I would give to you. Say, like, is it really worthwhile investing? Maybe I'll use I had to answer that question once, and actually after this conference I'm flying to Kigali for e-learning Africa, where I prepared a kind of story. If it's really worthwhile to do it or not, I use this book quote from Thomas Friedman in his book, The World is Flat. Also, that explains a little bit about the thing. And he says, well, every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up and it knows it must run faster than the fastest lion or it will be killed. And every morning a lion wakes up and it knows it must outrun the slowest gazelle or it will starve to death. And then his conclusion was, well, it doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you better start running. And that was a bit the feeling that I have, working, in a center as a Chief of Learning Innovation is a question, do I need to participate or not? Actually, I don't ask the question. I'm running, but running in hopefully a strategic sense, without preaching the next revolution, without selling the next gadget out there, but new technology are going to be part of our, biological ecosystem, and I think VR, AR, and mixed reality will have a place more than in the past. Virginie, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, there's another question. Okay, we still have 5 minutes. That's good. Yes.
Hi there. I was just wondering whether any of your learners flagged any sort of accessibility concerns, and if so, how you reacted to those.
Yeah. Interesting, because like one of the motivations for us also to move into VR was one of the accessibility type of elements, because we wanted to raise awareness, and there's like a few applications that they put you in the perspective of, for example, a disabled person, how walking in a wheelchair, what that actually means in a thing, and you get the whole, let's say, virtual reality type of experience, which is quite powerful, actually. One of the also powerful movies that I've seen, in the glasses, you basically see how someone with autism or I think perceives the world, and it creates like exactly the same kind of thing. So we work a lot on, let's say, accessibility in these kind of things as kind of raising awareness of, but asking the accessibility question on, in general, are these devices accessible for specific target audience? I still think there are, issues out there, and something definitely to take into account on it. And broader than accessibility, we're working a lot on digital inclusion, for example, because most of the countries that we work with sometimes still have issues out there. This still requires bandwidth at the same level as if you would do a kind of a Zoom conference. It's also becoming more accessible in that kind of area, but according to me, it's going to be one of the more strategic questions that we will have to respond all the time in order not to associate it again as the high-tech solution that is only for the early adopter or for the technology literate. I think that should be a question that we ask with every single, let's say, initiative that we are undertaking, independent of using it as an educational program to raise awareness on the challenges of disabled people or all the other examples that I have actually said. But again, it's not only VR, augmented reality and mixed reality. Maybe there could also be creative solutions to create experiences for those target audience which have specific accessibility issues. Thank you. Any final question? There's a final question there. Good.
Oh, and I'm glad we're finishing with you, you know?
Okay.
You're the only women asking questions.
Oh, right. Well, I'm glad I represent women here. Yeah, first of all, thank you for pointing out that we don't need to create the exact same environment in virtual reality, because we do tend to do that. And I had a question, maybe a practical question, as we're trying to shift to mass distribution of VR learning. Do you have a view on how we can tackle challenges like content update or localization, translation of content? Because one of the pushback that we sometimes get from our stakeholders is, okay, but like my storyline course here is so easy to update and I can just, manage it very easily. How do we do that, with VR? Any view on this?
Yeah. When difficult to answer generically on it, but in our immersive learning environment, we were doing then our Foresight Labs or our workshops, and we have the same question. You're like, okay, I have a multilingual audience out here. How do I address it? Do I need to recreate 3 type of content elements? For us, that posed us fully in, let's say, at that time, yeah, it would have been very difficult. How would I say it? In our pilot stage, we also didn't have the budget to create 3 environments for the amount of languages there. But it asked the questions, how can we make it accessible without having to go into translation mode? So our Foresight Labs are very visual. We work with metaphors. We work with 3-dimensional modeling, which is perfect to do in VR. So you move beyond the kind of, I don't need to customize it now in 3 languages. So it puts us back on the drawing table. However, the question will remain. I mean, you remember the slide where I said the cost of the return of investment on content creation. I still think that it's relatively high in the beginning. You just will need to scale it up to have that return. It's reusable infinitely every day. Like that would be a kind of an argument, but I wouldn't say that. I've seen interesting experiments because I saw now in the last time that I went, the company took it up and put like a kind of an automatic AI type of Google translator into that. But it would be the same if I would be sitting here and we would sit on an iPad and do Google translation to each other. So it's still a little bit awkward. It's still not the natural kind of feel that you would have with a direct interpreting boot on there. But I think we just need to, I always say we cannot use it as an argument then to stop innovating. We just need to move on, knowing that is not a perfect situation, but see how we could address it in a different way, because again, we have too much expectations towards the technology. We think that the VR will solve it or any other technology. Sometimes I said, forget about the problem. What objective do you want to achieve? And let's move into it, even if it's not perfect. And as I said, if you go with that kind of changing mindset, there's plenty of unexpected things that happen. Actually, maybe as a funny story. You're there with 20 people in that immersive learning environment. And what happens if you want to check out? People usually put off the headset, but they forget to check out. What happened with these avatars, they basically felt like dead bodies on the floor. There was a moment that I was walking through and there were like all bodies lying around just because people forgot to log out. But that created, again, on itself, a kind of a funny environment. It's like, yeah, we're still in a fully experimental mode, but then, I mean, it's the same with all the jokes that you have on unmute and mute, you also will have it in there. So no environment is perfect, and yeah, let's maybe also use sometimes a bit more humor in order to overcome the challenges out there. Thanks a lot for your attention, and have a good reception.